Right. Welcome to Roots of Reality Experiences. I'm joined by J.R. Richards, who is the former frontman of the band Dishwalla, which is famous for having Billboard's 1996 Rock Song of the Year, Counting Blue Cars, and the platinum-selling album Pet Your Friends. Lastly, J.R. has also produced several solo albums and music for a variety of TV shows. So, J.R., thanks for coming on.
Ben, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Just starting off then, when did you first get interested in music?
This might seem a bit odd, but my first memories of a child was before I could even walk, and I was in a crib, and I used to stand up in the crib and hang on to the corners, and I could hear music in my head, and it was a concrete floor in my bedroom that I shared with my older sister, and I used to rock the crib all the way across the room, my parents said, because I just remember hearing music in my head. I used to dance to the dryer and the vacuum, and so I
Wow.
mean, music has been in there. My father, families, everybody's super musical. Everybody sang and played multiple instruments. So I was playing piano at 4 or 5, and you know,
That's awesome. So, definitely like a
just
natural thing for you, I guess.
yes, it's one of the few things I do well.
Fair enough. And so, what did you listen to growing up then?
Gosh, everything. I mean, so much of it was certainly my father's influence. He was really deeply into music of all types, and so he was always sharing mostly, really good songwriting craft stuff. I mean, from the Beatles to James Taylor to Gordon Lightfoot, Eagles. I mean, all that kind of stuff, and he liked to discuss, parts of the songs, and he'd pause it in the middle of the song and say, "Okay, why does this bridge so effective?" You know, I'm 5. I'm like, well, um, relative minor change there.
Yeah. Wow. So
Yeah.
it sounded like your dad then was wanted music to be a big part of your life then from a young age.
Yeah, it was a huge part of his. I mean, my dad was very bright, mathematician, went to Stanford, um, but I think he always fancied himself being, a rock musician.
Okay.
Uh, my mother said that she was always at the parties would always be the piano widow because he'd be off singing and entertaining everybody while she was, kind of sitting off to the side of the piano waiting for him to finish.
Wow, that's funny. And
Yeah.
was there a particular moment then that you decide, okay, I'm going to become a professional musician then?
No, I never really thought about doing that consciously. I mean, it's something that I've just always done, and I was always going to school too with the idea that I don't know what I wanted to do. I mean, I was studying music quite a bit. I've studied jazz and classical piano. I've studied bel canto opera technique for about 30 years. I was a music major with a German minor, which is completely useless.
Wow.
So I never really had a complete plan, and but I was fortunate enough to do well enough doing music where I haven't ever had to get a proper job.
Yeah, that works. That's cool. So how did then the band Dishwalla form and stuff? How that come about?
Yeah, so where I grew up in Santa Barbara, where I am right now, um, is per capita has a tremendous amount of talented people in the arts, and so there was never a shortage of people to play with. From a very young age. I mean, my first band, I was 9, and there were other great musicians around. So the first drummer in Dishwalla, George Pendergast, he and I were in a band together when we were 12 years old. And it's just one of those things you just kind of network, and there are musicians that you gel with, and there's musicians you don't. And over time, we kind of morphed into what became Dishwalla, and we were writing songs and playing in Santa Barbara and doing really well, and then we just kind of slowly worked our way down south to Los Angeles, and next thing you know, we had 2 or 3 labels fighting over signing us to a record deal.
Wow. And okay, so your first album then came out in 1995, was it?
Yeah, 95.
It
Yeah, yeah.
a few years ago, yeah.
2 years ago. Yeah, it's been a few minutes, right?
Um, were you expecting that album to have a hit right away, or was it kind of like, oh, this might be an album that was just kind of getting started and have some good songs, but not really expecting anything huge?
No, I mean, I was so young and just so happy to be in the moment that I wasn't really thinking about hits or
Okay.
what next. It was bless my heart at the time. I was so much better at being in the moment, right? Which
Yeah.
is such an incredible thing. I think as children, we're much more in the moment, and as we get older, we start being told we need to worry about something we did in the past or something that might happen in the future, and so we forget to be in that moment. I was in that moment in the early '90s, and then as soon as we did have a hit, all of a sudden responsibility showed up, and that
Yeah.
changed everything. Because all of a sudden you started thinking like, oh my gosh, well what happens if we don't write another hit, or I don't write another hit for the next album, or we didn't do well enough, and that changed everything. So all of a sudden it started to become more of a job and less of an enjoyment, which it was,
Yeah.
at the beginning.
So you start to feel that pressure, I guess, because you're like, okay, I've already achieved something. How do I keep it or grow from it? So,
Right. Well, and there's this big mechanism, with a big major label is now hedging and investing a lot of money in you to continue to do well. They already have, and you've done well, it's paid off. And so now there's this huge expectation that you're going to make them hundreds of millions of dollars. So, I mean, it's crazy. I mean, you think, just in the United States alone, we sold probably more than 1 million albums now, but just 1 million at, $10 to $15 a CD. I mean, that's a lot of money
yeah.
uh, being generated. Not that we ever saw any of it as a band, but I mean, it's certainly showing up in somebody's bank account. And so, yeah, there became this huge expectation to, what's next? Where are the hits at? You guys, you got to make this happen. And yeah, it became really, really stressful.
Yeah. And how old were you then when that first album came out?
Pretty young. I mean, probably 21, 22.
Okay. Wow. All right. So, wow.
Yeah, which seemed older at the time, but in hindsight, I'm 57 now, right? So it's weird to think back that
Yeah.
how young I was.
Yeah. That's definitely an age where I imagine having a hit song would be like, wow, okay, this is interesting. But I guess you wouldn't necessarily know because you were so young of how like big of a deal that is at that point.
No, you really don't. And I think when you're in that position as an artist, often no one's really telling you. I mean, people are constantly telling you how amazing you are, right? I mean, that is the word amazing is just thrown around like, conjunctions. I mean, it's just like it's in every part of every sentence. It's just crazy. And so you become desensitized to it because it's just how people talk. You can be completely tanking and bombing, and they'll be like, "Oh no, album is amazing. You guys are doing amazing. Everything's amazing." So you don't really think about it. But when they actually are saying you're doing amazing, and within the system of being an artist and releasing a record worldwide, you are doing amazing. We
Right.
had no idea because we had nothing to judge that by, right? I mean, I'd never experienced that before. The only thing I really noticed was the audiences would get bigger, and that was
Yeah.
about it.
Yeah. Okay. That was the only sign that okay, things are moving up.
Yeah, I'm like, oh, there's more people here tonight.
That's cool. Yeah.
That's cool.
So I mean, the obviously the really famous song "Counting Blue Cars," came out. I've heard some different sort of stories about that song. What was the inspiration for it, and how'd you come up with that?
So, I mean, it was written quickly. I wrote it quickly. The lyric certainly came quickly. I mean, in that time period, in that moment, I was writing a lot, and that one happened quickly. So, I mean, I remember finishing it and thinking like, oh, that's a good song and solid, and just kind of set it aside and moved on. But from a lyrical perspective, the idea was writing a song about from a child's perspective of being kind of on this spiritual journey, right? Of at a time where kids have not been told how they should visualize everything, how they should refer to things. And I think that, again, kind of back to what I was saying earlier, how kids tend to live in the moment and see things really as they are, because nobody's told them that there's a definition that they have to
Sure.
follow, right? For this and that. So it's just ideas going from one side of the town to the other, looking to have a conversation with God, right? And of course, God is, I used a female gender in that, and didn't really think much of it because it's like, well, why not? I mean, if God exists, I can't imagine that it's this dude, with a beard. I mean, it's like, come on. So it's supposed to be this omnipotent being, right? So it could be anything, ideally, in my mind.
Yep.
So anyway, so that was kind of my idea with it. I didn't really think much about it, but then the song ends up becoming very popular, and then people are saying, "Well, it's because you have a very controversial lyric," and I'm like, "What are you talking about?" To me, that was not controversial, but I mean, I was getting death threats. People
Wow.
would, yeah, oh yeah, people would picket the shows,
Oh my gosh.
yeah, I mean, it might be two or three people, and of course there are 2,000 people showing up at the show, so they're a bit outnumbered. So I would
Right.
always tell everyone in the audience, please be gentle. They're allowed to
To
they're
our
allowed to
friends
say how they
outside.
feel. Yeah, exactly. I mean, let them do their thing. They're allowed to say how they feel, and that's absolutely
Right.
fine.
They're fans of the band in their own way. That's it.
Right. Well, they're certainly helping,
Yeah.
bringing attention to us. So I mean, it's like, do you guys realize that that's actually counterproductive to what you want to happen? But
Yeah. I mean, that is hilarious. I mean, I mean, you're based in California, so I guess it would have been crazier if you were based in like, where I'm from, and I'm originally from Kansas in the Bible Belt. And so it is an area where you get a little bit more of that happening with some of the more
yeah.
radical churches.
Well, I mean, and because it's all perspective, and I get it, and
Yeah,
I totally respect how anybody feels about anything. That's fine. They don't have to
sure.
listen to the song.
No.
There was an American Idol where one of the top kids in it, one of the songs they asked him to sing was "Counting Blue Cars," and he refused because of the lyric.
Wow.
Yeah, because I went through they contact you because you have to give them permission because they're syncing it to video, so you have to get permission from the publisher in order to do that. And so we go through all the rigmarole, and of course, it would be great to have someone sing the song on American Idol because it shows, kind of reminds people of the song, and so whatever. But yeah, he's like, no, no, I can't sing that lyric. It's against my religion. So
That's
bless
fascinating
his
to me.
heart.
Yeah.
That's fine. I mean, it was a bummer, but at the same time, hey, I respect his decision to not do it, and it is what it is.
It's interesting that you mentioned, sort of the controversy around that song because I've listened to that song many, many times, and it's one of those songs I remember specifically of like a '90s song that was part of sort of my childhood. Though I was really young when that song came out and listened to it more often. I feel like growing up a little bit, but hearing those lyrics, I never once really thought about oh, the fact that you refer to a god figure as being a woman or something. I never thought about that at all. I mean, I heard the lyric but never processed that would be controversial or whatnot. I feel
Yeah.
like maybe just because the song became so popular, that's the only reason why people started to analyze it. Otherwise it would have just been over people's heads perhaps. But
Oh, no, clearly. I think that if it were, a flash in the pan, nobody would have cared. But because there's so much attention to it, then people
yeah.
feel the need to chime in with their view of it. I mean, you should see the feed on the video on YouTube or any place that it shows up because they're obviously the majority of the people that love the song because they're there
Yeah.
listening to it and they say, "Wow, great, such a great song." Reminds me of being, young in the '90s. And then there's that one person that's just like, "You're gonna burn in hell," and then it jumps to the next person that's like, "Wow, this reminds me of hanging with my dad, before he passed in the car."
Yeah.
So it's an interesting contrast of what the song means to different people. It's quite interesting to read.
Yeah.
So, I like certain comments and some I just ignore and.
Yes. The blender that is internet comments, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I
Um,
mean, that's all fine. I mean, there was a lady in Florida at one point that was sending me pictures. She'd got our we used to actually have a real snail mail
yeah.
postal address that you could contact the band in the '90s, and so she was taking pictures of her 9mm handgun that she was going to shoot me with when we came through.
Wow.
Yeah,
That's insane.
that's totally insane. So we turned that one over to the FBI.
That's a good idea. Yeah. That's what I would recommend.
Yeah, I guess she was mailing those pictures from Florida to
Yeah.
California, so that becomes a federal offense. So
Yeah, that's pretty crazy. I mean, but it also just shows that like, the world has always been a little insane to a certain extent with stuff like that
Yes.
happening. So,
Yeah, we're human beings, man. We're
yeah,
all over the map. That's just
that's
how
for
we
sure.
operate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm curious then, given the song and its nature, did you yourself have, such an experience as a kid where you like talk to your parents about, sort of spiritual ideas or religion or God at all?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's interesting because my mother is very spiritual. My
Okay,
father is very analytical. So, but they got along brilliantly, right?
sure.
And my mother's very forward thinking in the way she sees things too. And so both things have rubbed off on me, and
Yeah,
even though it seems a bit of a contrast, I think they can absolutely work together, and I think that that's important to be open. But
sure.
uh, yeah, so I was exposed to kind of both sides of that
Yeah. I
of that
understand
point.
how that goes. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
And I feel like, I mean, the cool thing about the song and you writing about a kid kind of going through that process, because I do think that's like a rite of passage, as a human being growing up and trying to ponder, what am I doing here? Like, what's the point of all this? That's something I feel like almost everyone goes through at some point in their life.
yeah.
So
I hope so. It's important, I think, as a human being to ask questions and to not just accept things as you're told
right.
and to check, right? I mean, verify in your own
Yeah,
mind this or that. And I think that that's really important. And yeah, I mean, and kids have a very open mind to things. I mean, they're very much sponges. So sometimes they see things maybe in a better light than we do as adults.
yeah. Yeah, no, it's definitely true. Yeah, I think yeah, one of the things the song reminds me of, I remember, just having conversations with my own dad about stuff like that, kind of asking questions about, so what do people believe? Why do they believe this? What's going on? And he's like, well, some people believe this, some people believe that. And it
Mhm.
was all in kind of like in like car rides to hockey practice and like the stars route. Maybe it was on the way back when it was like dark outside going through like rural Missouri back into Kansas and just thinking, and this song always seemed like a good kind of reminder of that because of of what the song's about. So um,
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I mean, it's supposed to paint a picture, and it's
yeah,
not really about the religious aspect of it. It's
no,
just more of
no,
just being a kid and that, like you said, that rite of passage of having these conversations and and the journeys that we make, even if they are just down the street or across town, they're a big deal, especially to children.
yeah,
For the first time.
yeah, no, definitely an iconic song, and yeah, just kind of an interesting thing. It's a different type of song because I feel like you know, there's a lot of songs that are kind of generically about the same type of topics of usually people's love life or something like that, but songs that are a little bit almost a little philosophical in nature, just about humanity. It's
Yeah.
kind of interesting. So
Yeah, and I think it showed up at a time where there wasn't a lot of that going on too, because I
yeah,
remember, or even our own label, where they didn't really know quite where to take the song. Like, what format do we put this under? Because it doesn't really fit nicely into all of these different little genres of radio or whatever. So that was a bit of a challenge. But I mean, the song just kind of took on its own life, and yeah, hugely grateful that it did, and still a bit surprised.
yeah.
I wasn't expecting that, but I'm I'm hugely grateful for it.
Yeah, I mean that makes me think that how often do you have moments where maybe you're in a grocery store or something and that song comes on and like what goes through your head then when that happens?
Yeah, I mean, it happens a lot. And of course, I always have friends that every time they go somewhere, they feel like they've got to film themselves and with the song going on, 7-Eleven or wherever they're at, and they shoot
Yep.
it to. So I'm just kind of inundated with. But it's really cool that it has crept into all these different places, whether you're on the elevator and it's an elevator version of the song, or you are at a 7-Eleven or getting gas and it's like they're pumping it over the speakers while you're pumping. So
Right.
it's always a bit of a shock at first because I go Oh wow, that's right.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's me. Yeah.
Yeah, it's cool. Really
Yeah.
cool.
That's an awesome thing and something that you're probably going to hear the rest of your life. That song's be playing in random places. So,
Yeah, that's one of those songs that, and I don't think it's not the best song I've ever written too. So it's funny that that was the one that was chosen to be that kind of forever uh, classic. It's turned into a classic song, where it's
sure.
just became part of that time.
It is interesting. I've kind of noticed a trend from talking to a lot of musicians, how a lot of the songs that have become very popular, I keep hearing people say that the song took a short amount of time, like it was a quickly written song. I wonder, is there some type of like instinctual element where something just clicks and you write it down, versus songs that are a little bit more thought out or maybe you're overthinking it?
Mm, yeah, I think I relate that too to how open we are when we're being creative. I mean, my experience is that it's not doesn't really kind of come from within. It kind of comes from out in the universe somewhere. And it's just
Yeah,
about being open to accepting those ideas and kind of getting into that flow. I mean, whatever you might call it,
sure.
the Force if you're into Star Wars, or or like a religious kind of moment, but um, it is just really kind of being open to those things and kind of channeling it and getting focusing it down in a way where it's captured and that usually happens quickly when you're in that flow state, I think.
Yeah.
Because I know, I mean, I write so many songs and most of them are pretty crap. And it takes me writing a lot of songs to get those ones that do show up, and you're like, wow, that's I don't even remember writing that, but that's great, and it
Yeah.
happened quickly, and it was much less painful than some of the other songs I've written that can take years sometimes to finish.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. I mean,
Mm.
I feel like when I'm working on something, not music, obviously, but but in general, it's yeah. I feel like if I'm in the shower or something like that, or doing something where I'm just not thinking, something will pop in my head. I'm like, oh, this is a good way of,
Yeah.
doing such a thing. So I guess another aspect of human nature, I suppose.
No, true, true. Because I think it's just getting out of our own way sometimes in order to be the best that we can be. We kind of limit ourselves really more than
Yeah.
anything else.
So thinking about the '90s, then how would you describe sort of the legacy of 1990s music
The legacy. That's a good question. It was a cool time. I mean, I think um, not every period is that way, but a lot happened musically in that time. A lot of things were happening around the world in that moment. Um, and we kind of went from this. It's interesting because you're growing up in the 80s and you're listening to certain bands, and I'm listening to bands in the 70s and the 80s, as a kid growing up, going through high school, starting college. But what I grew up listening to was not what I ended up kind of creating.
then?
So it's, you're trying to do something different because we just had this big grunge thing happen in the early 90s, and this post-punk thing started to show up with Green Day and that kind of stuff. And then we ended up being this kind of power pop band that basically a pop rock band that shows up out of nowhere, coming out of this really kind of dark uh, grunge thing where it was very introspective and not a lot of positive lyrical stuff going on. It's a lot of just dealing with self-destruction and chaos. And I've always tried to write songs that have they can be certainly melancholy as well, but I try to put some hope in there as well too.
Yeah.
At least as the song evolves, and not just leave it as just being this dark, like we're all screwed kind of thing. I
Life
hate
sucks
that.
and then you
So
die.
yeah, it's like I gotta have a little bit of hope, at
Yeah.
the end. Yeah.
Yeah, I think yeah, I definitely get that vibe from thinking about sort of like I guess the 1990s alternative rock scene, I suppose. And it kind of, yeah, it's interesting that we kind of went from like the 80s where you had a lot of like hard rock bands to heavy metal, and then obviously you mentioned grunge, um, and punk rock, but yeah, like Dishwalla and a lot of the other, you know,
Yeah.
the bands, and even into like the early 2000s, I feel like it's up, more upbeat, a little bit lower key in terms of loudness. So
Yeah, no, it's interesting. I tried to write, it was more of about songwriter craft and lyrically it was kind of interesting. Um, Also, too, which is what was happening in the world of music, too, from a technological perspective, is now towards the end of the 90s, all of a sudden, the idea that if you wanted to own music or listen to music, you had to buy a CD or an LP or cassette tape, right? And that all changed with Napster and them figuring out how to compress and create an MP3. And so we were kind of the last of those artists making records. I mean, the first record that we did was all analog,
yeah,
nothing digital about it. And by the time Dishwalla did their last album in 2005, it was 100% digital. So we went through this weird, morphing from one thing to the next. So that is also a big part about it. Like the whole industry completely imploded and changed dramatically because of the technological evolution that happened.
yeah, yeah. It makes me think about like what the future is going to be with AI and music, and how that's going to change things.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, my perspective is just really trying to use it more as the tool that it is. I mean, I'm certain that it will get to a point where it can write wonderful songs and
Yeah,
mimic performances from some of the best musicians, but it can't go perform live,
true.
and
Yeah.
so it'd be interesting to see what happens. And the interesting thing right now is that whole intellectual property of our
Hmm.
timbre of our voice. I mean, you see ads on YouTube right now, and it's Joe Rogan, it's voice,
Yes. Yeah. Yes.
but it's an AI, and it's like selling some flashlight, and it's like, well, hang on, that's clearly Joe Rogan,
Right. Yeah.
and so how are you able to do that without getting permission from Joe Rogan or paying him for the usage of his personality, right? Because that's what you've captured, the essence of that. So it'll
Yeah.
be interesting to see how that where that lands. But and same thing with all the singing voices that are being mimicked and singing styles and all that stuff. So I don't know. It's gonna be a crazy ride for
Yeah.
sure.
I'm sure it'll be like many things, kind of sort out through lawsuits over time, and
Yeah, yeah. I mean the engine is a bit slow
yeah.
figuring that stuff out, and often because it usually shows up in the political realm. At some point,
Sure.
there has to be some legislation that is made to decide how it's all going to happen. But then you're usually trying to describe this to a bunch of older conservative white gentlemen. The idea of what it is to the difference between the CD player that they probably grew up listening to and having this artificial intelligence like doing the same thing, but it's not actually on anything physical. I mean, it's hard for them to grasp, I think, because they're not in that business at all. So to get them to understand maybe how it affects us as artists
Yeah.
when it's something creative, because it's not tangible in the way where you can say that this, well, they stole the books out of my bookstore.
Yep.
So
Yeah.
I don't know. It's always a bit odd trying to figure that out because they've been doing that since, gosh, I don't know how long, but a long time. Trying to figure out how to quantify the worth of a song and the performance.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think it's gonna be interesting to see. I mean, I could easily see a song come out that is popular, that is completely made by AI, and people don't even know it yet.
Right.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
and it's someone would probably reveal that at some point, like, oh, this was just an experiment. I created the song, and
Yeah. Yeah.
um,
Well, there's already a lot of lawsuits flying around because enough
yeah.
people have figured out how to do that, and then it's uploaded, finds its way to Spotify or YouTube, and it's gone viral
Yep.
because people think it's Jay-Z or whatever, and
Right.
and of course Jay-Z and the label are like, hang on.
Nope.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. It's
So,
pretty interesting times.
mm.
So, how do you think then the 1990s kind of has influenced music today?
Well, things are very cyclical, I think, and we go through periods, I think, where how we listen to music, how we create music, we're kind of it kind of jumps. Like we go through periods where everything is very, very sincere and stripped down, and then we'll go through a moment where everything is superly overproduced. Well, I wouldn't say overproduced, just super produced. Depends on your perspective. Super produced and really technical and very, very. It can very much sound very defined to that moment in time because you're using a technology that just came out or a sound or something. And so it kind of jumps back and forth because I know that like growing up in the 80s, in the early 80s, there was live music everywhere. And then it went through this period where it was more about DJs and uh, I don't know, dance routines and other stuff. And then it kind of came back around in the 90s where it became more organic again, where it was more about, you know, a band on a stage playing songs. And then it will go back into the kind of the focus is more on you know, DJs and dance routines and yeah, you can see this whole thing with funny enough with Taylor Swift and Dave Grohl having this conversation because you know he was at the O2 the other night talking about how she's not really playing music live and that
Mm,
they are that's all they
yeah,
do and so the difference between being at their rock show compared to her show but and maybe she's gone through those phases but actually she is really playing. I mean there's certainly a lot more stuff going on
sure.
that is you know not really that organic, right? And pre-planned and a lot of that, but that's kind of part of her genre. So I just think that it goes through phases where all of a sudden you have a Nirvana that's like the biggest band in the world, and then you have, you know, you might have more of a Madonna thing where it's the band part of it is really not the focus. It's more about the costumes and the routine and the songs and so, I mean, I think that there will always be great songs, there'll always be great songwriters. I think that the 90s kind of, sorry to get back to what you're saying, I think the 90s kind of brought it back to that, focusing more on the song for a moment without having a lot of bells and whistles going on at the same time. And
Yeah.
I think right now we've kind of gotten back, we're in that mode right now. There are so many great singer-songwriters that are just out there playing it, you know, guitar, bass, drums, or piano, and that's it. And they're crushing it right now, which is great. Um, but we'll go through a period where the next generation beyond that will be more interested in something that's different from that, and
Yeah.
then we'll go back to that. So
Sorry, do you feel like pretty good about how music has evolved over time then, especially also in the rock genre, for example?
yeah, absolutely. I mean, people. It's funny because people. I get a lot of people that comment like, "Oh, you know, they listen to Candy Blue Cars or other songs we've written," and it's like, "Oh, this is when music was at its best,"
Yeah.
and which it's because of because of the experience because that's when you were experiencing new music for the first time and it was new and so it's hard to maybe grasp a lot of the newer stuff that's going on and there's so much more going on,
Yes.
right? I mean if you were a band in the 90s or you were listening to the radio, you're only listening to the bands that are signed to major labels. That's it. They're not playing anything else. Nowadays you're exposed to people that have recorded the album in their bedroom and have no deal and they're blowing up on TikTok or something because they did something brilliant. And so there's so much more of it now. So but because of that though too, it's harder I think to maybe realize that there are bands that are doing things similar to that happened in all these different periods, whether you were an 80s fan or 70s or 60s and think that those were the times. I think that it echoes, and it's the things that we were tapping into in the mid 90s. I see reflections of that showing up now. And so I think if I'll say to people, hey, have you checked out this artist? I think they're
Yeah.
great. They sound like they could have been from the 90s.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, the I feel like that's something that's gonna kind of keep popping up to a certain extent because also like the way people are finding music has changed so much now. Where
Mm.
people aren't like you can't I don't think they play new music on the radio really anymore if someone's listening in their car. And so you're just gonna get
Nobody's even listening to the radio
no,
anymore.
that's right. So like if it's like if for the people that are like stuck on those stations, they're never gonna hear anything. And so they're any new song that comes out, they're like, what is this? Yeah, what kind of music is that? So
Yeah. Well, it's weird. It's like, asking kids where they hear new music. I mean, I have my wife and I, we have four boys, right? And so watching them go through music, I mean, they're exposed to a lot because I'm obviously playing a lot of music in the house. But in terms of finding their own music
Yeah.
of their own generation is totally different. I mean, they're finding it through video games
Yep.
or a viral 10-second video. And only since some of them have gotten old enough to go to an actual concert, they'll go to Glastonbury or something like that, and they come back and their minds are absolutely blown. Like I saw this band just go out, walk out on stage, and just completely change my whole perspective on music, and I'm now a massive fan, and I love that because those are the kind of bands that are doing the things that we did in the 90s, where what we recorded is also exactly how we would do it on the
Yes.
stage, and there were nothing there helping us doing that, or it didn't sound different, and it was more just that simple of we would go and play, and there's not dance routines or explosions or
Yeah.
I think that if you're like Coldplay and you're playing to 80,000 people a night, you do need to do more than just stand on stage and play,
Right.
because if you're going to actually put on a show for the person that's 1,000 rows back, you've got
Yeah.
to do something bigger than just put your hands up and woohoo.
Yep.
But I mean, for the most part, I think that the idea of just seeing human beings playing on stage exactly as you can hear them on Spotify is really cool experience. It's because I'm still a little weirded out on why the DJ culture is so big. I mean, I understand that people like to dance, and I understand it's a social thing,
Yeah.
but in terms of why they're so revered, because most of them, it's all pre-recorded. They don't
Yep.
do anything but show up and stand there and bop around with their headphones on and
Yeah.
make some tweaks. They're not like there are some that are doing some really cool things, don't get me wrong, but
No, that's
it's a
that's
weird one
accurate.
because it's like what they're giving you in that moment is not a lot. It's different than a singer playing an Elton John sitting there on a piano just rocking your mind, where he's actually creating it in that moment instead of just replaying it in that moment. It's a weird
Yeah,
one.
that
It's
is a
totally in my head about
fascinating thing, and that's why I do wonder like what's the sort of the what's going to come after that with like AI and stuff because it is at a point where people have already accepted that a DJ performing, which basically means like yes, playing their pre-recorded music and then maybe messing with the sound of it a little bit, and so the beat might sound a little bit different or impactful when you're listening or dancing. And then of
Yeah.
course you obviously have to have like lots of lights to have this show and kind of create a vibe. But you know, I just wonder like, are we gonna have like at some point in the future a hologram just playing, performing, some AI
I don't
routine
know. I mean,
music?
it's yeah, because that seems less human to me than seeing it. I mean, I'd rather see, go watch Depeche Mode play, even though a lot of it's tracks. There's still guys up there playing
Yeah,
synths, and the
there's
guy
still
playing
a
drums,
person.
and the guy's actually, David Gahan singing his ass off, and that is a nice hybrid for me from that kind of um, more electronica kind of thing. But it is weird to see somebody go up there and just press play, and get
What's
paid
up,
50
everybody?
grand for doing that. It's just mind blowing to me, and I'm so because I'm up there sweating and destroying my voice and it's and every night's different, and it's just a different thing. And so yeah, that one's a bit weird to me, but I feel like there is that cycle of where a lot of the generation will really get into that kind of mode where that's predominant. It's always there, but
Yeah.
that's more predominant. And then they'll go to a point where no, it's more about the live show and actually sing an artist sing
Yep.
in real time, and that becomes more predominant. Um, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I guess when you really began your career, there was not many DJs out there. The only one I could think of is like Fatboy Slim or something. Um,
Yeah, yeah, the DJ culture was different. I mean, the DJs at that time were really guys with like two CD players, and they were just like, playing songs back and forth, and then you start to get guys that were kind of coming more from the hip hop culture where they're actually beat juggling and they're mashing things together and actually being very creative, which is a talent to watch them do that in real time and make it sound really smooth and are doing it as people are reacting to it. So it is more of an art form for sure. But it is come to this point where a lot of it now is DJs just kind of hit literally pressing play and they have a set and they might change some filters and maybe drop a couple other beats on it, but and you know whoop at the crowd occasionally, but that's it.
Yeah.
And it's like and they're treated like rock stars. I mean, power to them, but I don't understand that one, you
Yeah,
know.
I mean, in a nightclub or if in like a party atmosphere, I guess it makes sense. But if you're going to a concert, like in a traditional sense, it does seem odd that that would be
Yeah,
the
because it's set up now more like a concert. I mean,
yeah,
I do appreciate you're creating an environment for people to have a good time and enjoy
yeah,
themselves. And a lot of them have really cool stuff that they've done in a studio that they're bringing in and then therefore playing live. But it's problem is you can't, you know, it's difficult to play that stuff in real time because it wasn't anyway.
yeah,
It was all programmed, right?
right.
So yeah, it's a strange genre. I try to get my head around, but not to put too much focus on that because it's all good.
That's right. I
Yeah,
mean, maybe you're gonna get invited at some point to be a part of some DJ's new song, and
you never know. Never know.
then you're gonna have to take back some of this. Like, oh, actually,
I
the
know,
DJ's
I
great. Yeah,
know. I'm happy to backtrack. That's fine.
yeah. There you go. So, thinking back then to your career, is there like a proudest moment that sticks out to you that you're like, wow, this is, a defining moment in my career?
Um, yeah, I mean, there's those moments where they're very public, where you might, you know, playing at the, you know, getting a Billboard award and you know, and playing and you know the whole front row of you as you're playing live on TV and you know is famous people in standing in front of you watching you perform on stage to them. I mean that's pretty amazing. But I think some of the bigger moments were the more private ones where you know you've recorded a song and you're hearing it back for the first time finished and like wow, okay, I'm actually hugely proud of that,
Yeah.
you know, and almost surprised at how how well it has all come together. Because that's, I mean, that's why I do it is really those kind of magical moments and the things that come with it or can come with it are wonderful. But uh, yeah, I think it is more of those kind of those very much those private kind of
Yeah.
happenings. You know, even if you're by yourself and you're like, wow, I can't believe I just did that or created that or whatever. You know, that's
Yeah.
powerful stuff.
That's a cool perspective to have on. And I guess, given the situation that you had when you started your career and you're able to kind of live in the moment, um, you know, I feel like for some people that, especially if they just become, they're so popular and become so famous that you kind of lose yourself over time, that you don't have a chance to reflect and have perspective anymore.
Yeah, no,
Um,
true.
so like, what has your career then kind of taught you about life then?
Right. Well, I think it's taught me to try to pay attention to the moment more because things can happen so quickly. It's hard to be in the moment. Um, and compartmentalizing things better.
Yeah.
It's like I like next week I have 5 shows in a row, which is a lot for me. Um, and I'm some of them I'm playing solo or playing like I'm headlining, and some of them I'm opening for another band. So it's kind of two different types of shows, and technically it's different. And and I'm doing them all solo, which is already totally out of my comfort zone. So a lot of it is just having that conversation of not freaking out and learning how to take that on as an opportunity as opposed to worrying about what could go wrong. And even if
Yeah.
something doesn't go the way I expected, it's trying to then take that in as like, okay, it's an opportunity to do something cool now, different, unexpected. So, um, and not fear all of that because I used to spend so much of my time thinking about how something was going to go and how well I might do. I mean, you know, I think being an entertainer, which is such a weird term, being a singer, and it's like you're out there literally trying to entertain people and keep their attention and make them feel good, and so I'm constantly judging how I'm doing all the time. And so a lot of it's just spending less time judging myself and spending more time kind of just enjoying whatever happens. There are good days and there are bad days,
Yeah.
you know. And so I'm kind of more in this mode of, you know, some days we learn and some days we win. And those are the two options.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's very healthy attitude about things. So
Yeah, and apply that to everything across the
yeah,
board, right?
exactly. Yeah.
That's the key, and it makes for a much healthier life.
Yeah, that's yeah,
It's hard
a
to
lot
do.
better way of going about
Yeah,
it.
yeah, exactly. It's hard to do, but it's worth the time.
Yeah. So then, what are you currently working on? Are you trying to produce any new albums in the future? Are you just doing shows or
Yeah, so I am doing a lot right now. So I'm currently doing a quick tour leg here on the West Coast. Some of the shows are with the band Toad the Wet Sprocket. I don't know if you're familiar with them, and then just solo. And then I'm going straight back to the UK. I have a couple shows in the UK where I live.
yeah.
And then I have the month off. Well, I'm working on my 10th album, my fifth solo album. So I'm desperately trying to finish that. And I'm also writing songs with a variety of different people. So I'm constantly doing that. And with the way things are technically, you can, I can be working with people that are in California or New York or Singapore or wherever, and I live in the UK, so I'm able to do that, and I'm also working on a like a self-help program for touring singers.
Oh
So
wow.
that's, yeah. So that's another thing. There are a lot of programs out there to help people sing, right? And but I just thought it'd be kind of cool to create something for people who, whether they sing at their local pub occasionally on the weekends or they're playing for 100,000 people on a massive world tour, just to create something to help them get through the pressure of doing any and all of those things and kind of maintain their voice and their sanity.
Yeah. That's cool. Yeah. Well, I know me and my brother will occasionally do karaoke. So I guess
Oh, that's awesome. I love that. No,
so
Carrie,
maybe yeah. Maybe I'll
I
need
was
that.
Yeah, well, so I'm terrified of karaoke. I historically, it's like my worst nightmare is, because I'm a professional singer. Well, my worst nightmare is bombing on a karaoke stage. So it's like you won't get me anywhere near that thing,
You just gotta perform your own song. Just go up there and then
which I did. There was a night where I was out with Rob Thomas from Matchbox
oh
20.
yeah.
Yeah, where we found ourselves in a karaoke bar in the middle of Wisconsin on a Thursday night, and I was telling him I was terrified, and he'd already put his hat in the
Oh no.
his name in the hat, and so he went up, but he did exactly what you said. He was very smart and went up and sang one of his own songs. So
That's
I was like,
hilarious.
genius. So I did the same thing because I followed suit and thought, well, I'll sing Counting Blue Cars because it was a hit at the time. So and much easier when you've written the song because you don't have to look at the
That's
screen.
a little bit, yeah. I was about to say that's for me. I've never had that experience, so
Well,
I'm
the
waiting.
funny thing is when I went back and sat down, and there was this table next to us of these guys that were just having a great time, and they were super rowdy, and they were singing and doing the whole thing. One of the guys leans over and he taps me on the shoulder, and he's like, "Hey, man," I'm like, "Yeah." He's like, "That was pretty good." It's like, "Thank you." He's like, "It's not quite how the guy does it, but that's the best I've heard." So it's kind of cool, you're in this moment of nobody even knows that you're the person that wrote that song up there
That's
singing.
really funny. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you didn't go up there and just be like, "Oh, by the way, I wrote that." So
No, 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 it didn't. But it did give us permission to go up and sing anything and everything because I figured if I
yeah,
go up and totally crash and burn on something, no one will care. So
yeah.
it made for a fun evening.
That's awesome. I mean, that must have been yeah, probably one of the craziest nights for that place, that karaoke bar, to have two professional singers with major hits
Then
performing
had
their
been
own
drinking
songs.
sake. Yes, I know. I've been drinking too much sake and
That's
um
hilarious.
yeah. So it was a good time.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's fun. Yeah, karaoke's definitely a fun thing to do. Yeah, I think not too long ago I actually did it in Japan, which is really crazy.
Oh
I
wow.
was the
Yeah,
only
they take it.
person doing it in English, and so I was really popular just because no one else was doing English songs. So I was like, there you go. So
They take it very seriously there too, so
I
that's
know,
cool.
yeah. So it was yeah, it worked out really well. But
Oh, how fun, man.
yeah,
That's
fun
fantastic.
experience. So if you're ever in Japan, that's a good place to try and do some karaoke as well.
Yes, I know. Well, hopefully I'll get back there again and get that opportunity because that would be really
Definitely.
cool. Yeah, definitely sing some karaoke. Awesome.
And what's the best way for people then to follow your work?
The best way to follow? Oh
Yeah,
gosh, well, they can either get me at my website jrrichardsmusic.com, or they can find me on Patreon too /JRRichards. That's a good way. You can even join Patreon for free these days, so it's a good way to kind of see on a daily basis what I'm up to. If they want to know more about anything there, that'd be awesome. And you can
yeah,
reach out to me directly and say, hey, what's going on?
yeah. That's awesome. And you're on, I guess, all the social media platforms these days. So
Yes, yes, yes. So it's on the other ones. It's a little harder because I do what I can to try to respond to people, but I tend to get so many messages. It's hard to keep up with everyone. So I do
sure.
miss conversations with people that it just slip through the cracks sometimes because I don't see everything.
Yeah.
So
No, it totally makes sense. Well, thanks again for coming on and sharing your experiences and knowledge about music and definitely an iconic era for a lot of people, especially me. And so it's cool to be able to talk to you.
that's awesome, man. Well, I thanks so much for having me. I mean, hopefully to find this interesting.
Yeah. No,
You
definitely.
know, yeah, no, definitely, man. And yeah, well, maybe down the line we can do an update.
Yes,
So
that's right. That's
yeah,
right. See how things are going. Yeah.
indeed, I know, right? Yeah, still managed to keep doing this thing. It's been a long time that I've been doing this.
Yeah, that's cool to see you continuing the journey. I mean, I think that's what everyone wants to be able to do with things they're passionate about. So
Yeah, yeah, no, I know. Yeah, I've yet to get a real job, so so far so good.
that's right. Success.